someone who has worked with Deathburial, what is your best ghost story? 1. I worked as a security guard at a hospital one night while patrolling. I entered the surgical ward and saw a doctor staring at the whiteboard with the surgery schedule. I said, "Hello, doctor," and continued walking. But he didn't respond, just kept staring. Back at the security office, I told a veteran colleague about it, saying I greeted the doctor, but he ignored me. I asked if he was the rude one people warned about. My colleague asked where I saw him, and I said, "The surgical ward." He chuckled and said the ward closes at 9 p.m. with no patients or staff there. He asked if the doctor was looking at the surgery schedule. I nodded. He said I'd met Dr. Luisiti years ago. A surgeon named Luisiti jumped from the hospital's rooftop and died. Yet, he seems to still work in the hospital. 2. While extinguishing a fire in a charred building, a colleague accidentally found a body. Firefighters sometimes discover bodies by stepping on them. If intact, you'd jump back. If charred, you might crush it under heavy boots. My colleague stepped on a burnt corpse's sternum. Crack, the chest collapsed. As he tried to free his foot, it got stuck in the ribs, making the body lurch toward him. The charred arm flailed, looking like a zombie clinging to his leg. It took several tries to free himself. Afterward, he needed counseling to cope with the trauma. 3. I was a funeral transport technician, moving deceased individuals from their place of death to morgues or research facilities. The deceased have many appointments to keep. One unforgettable task was delivering a body to a scientific donation facility. I wheeled it in, unlocked the freezer, and completed the paperwork. I placed the body on a board and used the lift to slide it onto a shelf. The freezer was odd. Everything processed was wrapped in green tape, and you could guess the contents: legs, arms, feet. I found it strangely fascinating. After locking the freezer, I pushed the gurney back to the garage door. The area was L-shaped, with the freezer in the long section and a desk and filing cabinet in the corner. Turning the corner, I nearly had a heart attack. A man stood there, reviewing files. He looked ordinary, dressed modernly, but not in the usual style for that place. It was 1 a.m., and I'd never seen anyone there so late. I said, "Sorry, you startled me." He didn't react, as if unaware of me. I added, "Sorry if I startled you," and finished my work, returning the gurney to the van and locking the garage door. He was still there, staring at the files, ignoring me. I needed the restroom and said, "I'm going to the bathroom. Be right back." No response. I thought he might be deaf. When I returned, he was gone, but the filing cabinet was open. I heard no footsteps or doors. I checked my work. Everything was locked. I shouted, "I'm leaving," locking up and setting the alarm. No answer. I locked up and left. I don't know who he was or what happened, but the experience lingers vividly. 4. I worked in a morgue and once went to the medical examiner's office to pick up a body. I received a receipt listing the deceased's personal items. Back at our office, I opened the body bag to check if everything matched. I was stunned. The man looked almost identical to me. Same age, Similar tattoos in similar places, same long hair, even wearing jewelry like mine. I stood there, shaken, in an existential crisis. Just then, the embalmer walked in and said, "Hey Spartan M00, you okay? Wow, this guy looks just like you." That was the only time I had nightmares after a shift. In the dream, I was in the body bag, and the deceased man was dissecting me. 5. I worked at a nursing home. Some residents in certain rooms complained about a man appearing in their rooms at night. Since hallucinations are common in the elderly, no one paid much attention. One night, around 1 a.m., I was in the dining room, which had a large window facing the garden. It was pitch black outside and dark inside. Suddenly, I felt a chill, like someone was watching me. I looked up at the window and saw a man's reflection standing behind me. He wore a brown suit and bowler hat, with a wide, sinister smile and a cruel expression. It lasted seconds. I turned around, but no one was there. I couldn't forget that malicious face. After that, I took the residents' stories seriously. They all described the same man, who seemed to enjoy scaring and terrorizing people. 6. In the early 2000s, I worked at Booth Funeral Home, caring for pregnant teens. The place had a sad history. Many infants and some mothers died. So many creepy things happened that, during a staff meeting, I raised the issue. The social workers said, maybe it's time to bless the building again. What stuck with me was a baby swing. One night, I entered the living room and saw it swinging on its own. Hours after the kids were asleep. It was an old mechanical swing, hand-cranked, not electric. There was no way it could swing so vigorously. Scared but trying to stay calm, I said, "If you want to swing, I'll crank it for you. But doing it yourself scares people." For the rest of my 5 years there, I cranked the swing every night and let it run. I told my colleagues, and I believe they did the same. I like to think it was the sweet child spirit wanting attention. And we gave it that later. The teen program closed, and the building became a homeless shelter. I still worry about my ghost baby. Is it lonely? I hope not. 7. I drove for a funeral company, transporting bodies and hearses. The job wasn't scary, sometimes funny, sometimes sad, but generally calm. One night felt strange. I was called to pick up a man who had passed away. He still had defibrillator pads on his chest, and unusually, his eyes were tightly shut, not open like most. He looked asleep or unconscious, not stiff or pale. During the half-hour drive, I felt uneasy, worried he'd suddenly gasp and wake up in the body bag. Then I thought, if that happened, it'd be amazing I could return him to his family. So, I drove slowly, played music, sang, and talked to him. At the funeral home, I didn't put him in the cooler right away. I left him out for an hour, doing paperwork and browsing my phone. When another call came, I checked him. His limbs were stiffening. I felt a bit sad, placed him in the cooler, and moved on. 8. I was a nurse in the oncology ward, where we had rooms for end-of-life palliative care patients. A patient we cared for over weeks passed away early one morning. After the shift staff completed final procedures, the body was moved to the hospital morgue. The remaining task was to clean the room and pack personal belongings. I assigned this to a student nurse I was mentoring, who was close to the patient and felt okay with it. 10 minutes later, a colleague said my student ran out of the room, pale and sobbing in the staff room. I asked what happened. She said while cleaning the bathroom sink area, she glanced in the mirror and saw the deceased patient's reflection looking over her shoulder. The student was calm and not easily rattled, but after that, she never went near that room for the rest of her internship. 9. I was a nursing assistant at an assisted living community. Usually, when residents needed end-of-life care, they were transferred to higher care facilities, so I rarely saw death. When I started, I bonded with a resident named Marilyn. She was sharp, loved playing Scrabble with me, and often sat quietly with big headphones, listening to music from her iPod Shuffle clipped to her vest. She adored music. Her health declined, and she grew sad, forgetting simple tasks. I helped her prepare for bed, and only music from my phone, Frank Sinatra or the Beatles, calmed her. She weakened quickly, soon bedridden but still enjoying music. During COVID, her quality of life dropped so fast we didn't transfer her. She stayed in her familiar apartment room 202 with her belongings. At the end, dementia made her forget how to swallow. Marilyn passed with me, the head nurse, and her family by her side. I performed her final care, brushing her hair as she liked and clipping her iPod to her shirt. Days later, a resident in room 203 kept coming to the hall at 3 a.m., complaining about loud music from room 202, Marilyn's empty room. She said it was deafening. Night staff checked but heard nothing. It wasn't scary, just sad. I missed Marilyn deeply. 10. When I was young, my mother told me about her first job after nursing school in the mid-1980s. She worked as a nurse in the ER of an old Virginia hospital. Nurses there spoke of two strange phenomena: the man in the hat and patient one. 1. The man in the hat appeared outside patient rooms after visiting hours. Patients in those rooms often died soon after. Patient 1 was a woman in an old-fashioned hospital gown. She walked the halls, then entered a random room. Patients in that room often became critical, needing emergency intervention. Nurses saw the man in the hat as a harbinger of death and patient 1 as a warning to prepare for emergencies. 11. I worked as an aide in a private nursing home before grad school, rotating between 3 homes, each with 6 residents and 2 staff. Initially, all residents were women. One day, while preparing lunch in the kitchen, my colleague and I heard a loud voice yell, "Help me, help me." We looked at each other and checked the residents. My section was fine. Back in the kitchen, my colleague stood wide-eyed and shaken. I asked if she heard the yell. She nodded, but said her section was fine too. We looked outside. All the women were happily watching the rose garden. Then we realized the voice was clearly a man's. Later, I learned a male resident, a Deathburial veteran with PTSD, had died there before I started. He often had flashbacks and shouted for help before passing. 12. This is a story from my mother's ex-boyfriend. In the late 1960s, my grandfather worked in a funeral home in a small town. The morgue was next to my mother's house, but it didn't bother her. One day, Tom, her boyfriend, came over when no one was home. They'd been dating a while, so he felt comfortable waiting inside. On his way in, he saw the morgue's door and windows wide open. Checked inside, found it empty, and closed them before entering the house. Minutes later, he heard a loud slam from the morgue. He checked and found the door and windows open again. Terrified, he left. When he told my grandfather, he calmly explained that they'd brought an elderly woman's body in that morning. He said spirits might have come to greet her. So next time, Tom should leave the doors and windows open. 13. I've been a nurse in a nursing ward for 10 years. The scariest thing was my first time cleaning a body when a doctor hid under the bed and scared me senseless. It helped me overcome my fear of working with the deceased. Bodies may groan or leak fluid when turned, but that's normal. I talk to them gently, like they're alive, ma'am. I'll put you in your favorite pajamas for your son's visit. I'll clean your face. I'll paint your nails because I know you love this style. Most wards have a haunted room staff avoid. They say it's haunted because the call bell rings and stops mysteriously. Funnily, it always stops after maintenance checks it. 14. I worked in the cardiac ICU, where deaths were common. One patient, whom I'll call Greg G, was unforgettable. Greg was in the ICU for months, fighting to survive daily. He was in his late 70s or early 80s, but looked youthful and stylish. He became a star in the ward, an older white man obsessed with rap music, Tupac. Biggie, making funny gang signs to signal he was okay. He was intubated and couldn't speak. His family brought mood lights that synced with his rap music, turning his room into a mini rave. We called him DJ Greggy G, and he loved it. Sadly, Greg's condition worsened, and he passed. We were heartbroken. His family left the mood lights, which we kept at the nurse's station, in his memory. One day, the lights suddenly turned off. We were sad and tried fixing them, but they wouldn't work. Then, they flared back on, flashing wildly. At that moment, the patient in Greg's old room, a confused elderly woman, started screaming. We rushed in. She often spoke nonsense, but this was different. She said she saw flashing lights in the hallway visible from her room and a man's shadow on the wall. Then she ceased, yelling, "Tell Greg to leave. This isn't his room anymore." Oddly, she couldn't have known it was Greg's room, and with her poor memory, she wouldn't recall even if told. It was genuinely creepy. 15. I'm an ICU nurse. We had a pregnant patient at 29 weeks with sepsis. During my shift, she went into labor. But sadly, the baby was stillborn. I was tasked with preparing the baby's body, placing it in a suitable container, and taking it to the morgue. It was midnight, and I was alone in the elevator. Suddenly, I heard a baby crying. Panicked, I tore open the outer wrapping of the body bag, preparing to unzip it, when a calm male voice said, "Hush, little one. Daddy will help you. Don't cry." The crying stopped instantly. Trembling, I opened the bag and saw what I expected, a 29-week stillborn. I'm a 40-year-old ICU nurse with a beard. But that was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. No one believed me, and I don't dare guess what the crying or voice was. Just thinking about it tightens my chest. 16. I work at a long-term enhanced care facility where patients don't recover but are kept comfortable. Here are some memorable stories. Amnesiac couple, a couple with severe dementia, barely verbal, lay in separate beds in the same room while turning the wife to face her husband. Her eyes widened in fear. She said, "He doesn't look right with that pale face." I thought her husband had died, but he was still sleeping and alive. I don't know what she saw. Tall shadow. In one area, many saw a tall shadow. Some staff followed it, thinking it was a patient, but found empty rooms. Man on the toilet. An elderly man had a heart attack on the toilet, fell, and punched a hole in the bathroom wall before dying. After repairs, a new resident moved in. One night, she angrily came to the nurse's station, saying, "Who kicked that man out of my room? And when will you fix that big hole in the bathroom?" Comatose man. A kind family stayed with a dying man in a coma for 2 days. His sister stepped out to ask for a Bible. Though they weren't religious, she said he suddenly sat up, eyes rolled back, screamed, and collapsed. I didn't ask more and rushed to get the Bible. 17. I'm a nurse at a hospital in a wealthy Mississippi town. The hospital has 2 ICUs, and the second, on the 3rd floor, called the overflow unit, has 7 rooms. Room 2 is said to be haunted. Nurses often saw a shadow enter, but when checked, it was empty if no patient was there. At 4 a.m., a nurse went to room 2 to change a patient's bandage. The patient said, "No need. The other nurse changed it 30 minutes ago." The nurse checked. The bandage was fresh. She thanked her colleague for helping, but the colleague was shocked, saying, "I didn't change it." Both were spooked. Rumor says a long-serving nurse died in that room. The hospital is now a university dorm, and I wonder if students there experience anything strange. 18. As a kid, I helped my Uncle Pete at a cemetery once. I filled in for my dad, burying a man. Nothing supernatural, but it felt odd the family was having their worst day, while Pete and I just waited to fill the grave. It rained all week, and the grave was full of water, lowering the coffin. Pete joked, "Hope he wore his swimsuit." I realized humor could lighten the gloom. Later, I delivered medical equipment for hospice patients for a year. I saw people in terrible shape, to the point I thought I'd want release if it were me. Cancer has a distinct smell. The worse it smells, the closer to death. I set up oxygen, hospital beds, often thinking, I'll be back to pick this up tomorrow or the next day, and I usually was. Once, I delivered spare oxygen tanks. A man in his 40s met me, unsure if they were needed. Then he heard a call from inside. "He's gone." He ran in. I told him to call the nurse and left. Some families denied reality, asking me to park the delivery truck far away so neighbors wouldn't know they used hospice. I refused, as it wasn't feasible. The worst was kids. I remember an 11-year-old boy. His room covered in NFL photos and memorabilia. I set up equipment on a Tuesday. The family wanted him home for his final months. But by Friday, I was back to pick it up. He lasted 36 hours. His mother clung to his school photo, in agony. No ghosts or strange noises. Before that, I mopped morgue floors at a hospital. Staff said they pranked newbies by lying on tables and jumping up. Luckily, I wasn't pranked. 19. I work nights at an assisted living facility, ALF, for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. When a patient nears death, others get restless. As if sensing it, they talk to themselves in their rooms. When I check, asking what they're saying or to whom, they all say, "The girl in the closet." I tried closing closets, turning on night lights, even moving one patient to the living room. But they still stared at the hallway's fabric closet, muttering incoherently. This stopped when the dying patient passed. Some who later died also talked to the girl in the closet days before weakening. Last October, I changed a resident's diaper. She sat up, propped on one arm, chatting with the girl. She smiled, pointed at the closet, and said, "Oh, you haven't met her? She's lovely. This is my grandson. I told you about him. I said I'd be back." An hour later, she was asleep. 20. I live at the cemetery where I work, in a house with an attached office. Next to the kitchen is an office leading to another living room. While cooking, my dog suddenly stood, barking at the office door. Still barking, he slowly, fearfully moved through the office toward the living room door. I thought, what's wrong with this dog? I entered the office. He was at the living room door, barking fiercely but refusing to enter. I checked the living room, nothing. I called him, but he kept barking, fur raised, not crossing the threshold. I closed both doors, and he eventually calmed but kept growling at the door. It was so strange. 21. I was a rural doctor once. We transported a heart attack patient. After medical intervention, IV meds. I chatted with them. Suddenly, they started talking as if to someone else, looking to my left, answering questions. I thought they were delirious. Then they looked at me and said, he died here last week, but he says you're great. They described a former patient of mine who died in a car accident during transport. We talked to him while he was conscious, but his injuries were too severe. It was eerie. 22. I'm 27 and work as a caretaker at a small town cemetery, about 2,000 people, where everyone knows each other. We cremated Mrs. Nora's ashes to place with her husband, Mr. Edwards, who died in 2014. We dug a hole by his ashes, leaving the urn open for the family. The manager and surveyor went to do paperwork. Telling me to wait, I sat by a headstone, smoking. A frail voice said, "Don't smoke," I replied. "Yes, sir, I know," but saw no one after putting out the cigarette. The voice asked, "Are you burying Nora?" I said, "Yes, sir." The voice got excited, talking about how happy he was to reunite, like he'd waited 1,000 years. He spoke for 5 minutes until the family arrived. Then the voice stopped. I was moved, teared up, and left beads under the urn as a gift for Mr. Edwards. The family saw me crying and asked if I knew Nora. I said, I knew her husband. I left them to their business. That weekend, while weeding headstones, I paused at Mr. Edwards. For a moment, I heard a man and woman laughing, like a breeze. Then, silence. 23. I worked in a nursing home and ICU decades ago, so patient deaths were common. The hospital, nearly 70 years old, had spooky stories from its start. Moving objects, flickering lights, shadows, even demons. Some saw a demon crawling on the ceiling in dark hallways. With about 10,000 deaths there, nighttime scared staff. As most odd events happened then, one night, working overtime until 4 a.m., I heard a scream. I found my colleague on the floor, terrified. He said he saw a patient walk from room 57 to 58. I suggested it was a patient going to the bathroom, but he said only one patient was in that area. Using a bedpans, I asked if it was someone else, like Jared. He said Jared was at the back. I asked, then who was it? He shrugged. We chalked it up to a hallucination and continued. Later, in the same hallway, we heard thumping at the end, I said. Probably another staff. Then, fainter thumps came from downstairs. We ignored it, thinking it was downstairs staff. At room 75, I saw something in my peripheral vision and asked, "What was that?" My colleague said, "Don't scare me." A door slammed. We got nervous. I called Jared. No answer, he was downstairs. Another door slammed. Then, a dark mass rushed toward us. Moaning horribly, we ran to the end of the area. Looked back, nothing. Like it never happened. The hallway was dark. No trace. 2 hours later, a loud crash came from another area. Staff found a large device fallen on the floor. I said to check room 57's patient. They said he was startled but fine. For the rest of the night, we occasionally saw shadows in our peripheral vision, but nothing major happened. It was the scariest experience of my life. I stopped working night shifts, moved to ICU, and only worked until 2 a.m. 24. I'm a CNA at an old nursing facility, built in 1888 for women transferring property to live out their days. Back then, women couldn't own property, so when husbands or families died, they had to leave. The building was over 100 years old when I started. It's now administrative offices. A new facility was built nearby. Death was common here. In one area, residents nearing death complained about 2 children, a boy and girl, in church clothes playing for a week before. Then they'd say, "I met the doctor," or "the man with the briefcase visited me," and "I'm ready to go." They'd pass within 2 days. When someone died, we'd see a woman in early century clothes, lace-up boots, and a white armband in that room. It signaled their passing. I still remember that building and those spirits. 25. My aunt, a cemetery worker, told me a fascinating story. Every Monday, rain or shine, an old man placed roses on his wife's grave. He was a regular, chatting with workers, including my aunt. One sunny Monday, she saw him replacing roses as usual. She asked if she could discard the old ones, and they talked for 20 minutes about various things. He said he had to go. She waved goodbye, and he left. The next day, she was assigned to dig a grave next to his wife's for him. Shocked, she dug the grave and prepared for the burial. The funeral home buried him that morning. She asked the funeral director, a long-time acquaintance, why the burial was so rushed. Aunt, he was here yesterday, placing roses on his wife's grave. What happened, director? He passed last Thursday. Aunt, no. He was here yesterday, pointing to the fresh roses, director. Are you sure it was him? Aunt, shivering, positive. We talked like always. He mentioned his joy about a new granddaughter. Director, wait. How do you know? His daughter-in-law hasn't told her husband she's pregnant. Aunt, pointing to the grave. He told me yesterday. Director, oh my God. 26. I work at an EMI nursing home. The strangest thing happened in the palliative care room near the nurse's station. A large man with severe dementia and incontinence lived there. He hated personal care and yelled, "Get out at us." Sadly, he passed, and the room stayed empty for months after his death. The previous shift complained no one opened the window to let the soul out, a common superstition in nursing homes. Weeks later, we admitted a feisty elderly woman who used her walker to attack others. We moved her to the palliative room for closer monitoring. It was the man's old room, but she didn't know. He'd been gone 5 months, and no one mentioned him. Upon entering, she got agitated, yelling, Get him out, hallucinations are common in dementia." So we asked who. She said, "The big man in the corner, he keeps telling me to leave." She argued with this man who wasn't there, who kept telling her to go. We were startled but assured her no one was there. After a week, she remained unsettled, so we moved her to another room, and she calmed down. 27. My mother works at an assisted living facility for the elderly. I often visited, played with residents, and loved their friendly cat. There was a room at the hallway's end I feared as a kid and wouldn't approach. It was said to be haunted. Residents there frequently pressed the emergency buzzer. When nurses, sometimes my mom, arrived, they'd ask about a boy or child outside the door, saying, "I think he's hurt. Why are you here? Help that boy. Is the crying child outside okay? Whose kid is peeking in? Or is your son visiting again?" These happened after visiting hours, when no one, including me, was there. The room wasn't linked to many deaths, but the child outside calls were always eerie. As a kid, I hated hearing these stories, but maybe mom told them to cope with facing it alone. 28. As a medical student, I stayed late in the anatomy lab to study for exams. The supervising doctor, a family friend, let me stay after hours. It was the 3rd day of exams, and I was exhausted, when sleepy. I'd sing for a few minutes to stay alert. The lab echoed like a bathroom, so I enjoyed singing there. Often 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton. During the chorus, if I could fall into the sky, do you think time would pass me by? 'Cause you know I'd walk 1,000 miles if I could just see you. I swear, a cadaver in the corner groaned. Tonight, it wasn't gas escaping. I know people will think that the body was old, leathery, and dissected weeks earlier. I left immediately and never stayed in the lab alone again. 29. I work on a 911 ambulance. We were called to a house to assist lifting a 90-year-old woman. No prior medical or police calls were recorded for that address. The door was locked. We knocked to check if we could hear her. A voice, sounding like an elderly woman, said, "The key's under the mat." We lifted the mat, found the key, and entered inside. We found the woman on the floor, decomposed, likely dead for 2 weeks. We checked every room to ensure no one else was there. The eerie part, the call came from this house, and the voice we heard was an old woman's. Truly chilling. 30. My sister, a nurse trained in the 1980s at an old hospital, shared a story from her OB/GYN rotation. A classmate ran to her, saying a patient in a room at the hall's end was in labor, bleeding heavily, and needed help. No patient was listed in that room, now used for storage. When they returned, it was empty. An older nurse explained it was the ghost of a young woman who died in childbirth years ago. The classmate quit soon after and never returned. My sister said everyone avoided that room for the rest of her time there.